All right, and we're on. I don't mind us getting political, for what it's worth. But wait, what was the question that we ended up on?
What is the 상법 개정?
Oh, that's right. 상법 개정 is so like it's fiduciary duty plus like who you hold fiduciary duty to, right?
Okay.
Is it putting shareholders first, or is it putting the company first, etc., etc.? In Korean law, 상법, which is the trade law, it stipulates that the directors of a company should act in the best interest of the company.
Not the shareholders?
Well, no, in no
Uh,
country does it actually explicitly say shareholders.
Okay.
But in America, it's been reaffirmed in the Supreme Court time and time again that you have to put shareholder interest first. That's
Okay.
why it's become a sort of defining characteristic of American corporatism. Whereas in
Okay.
Korea, it's been reaffirmed in courts. Well, it hasn't actually been reaffirmed in courts, but it's been an underlying trend where directors of the company act in the best interest of the owning family. And it hasn't really broken out of that despite the fact that the courts have been trying. So what people are saying is that just stipulate it in the law, say that the directors have to act in the best interests of the shareholders, and just call it a day.
Can you give me an example of, like a recent example of where the directors acted in the interest of the company and not the shareholders?
Right. So the most infamous example is Samsung.
Okay.
Yeah.
When EJ, so before, there's this company called 제일모직, which owns Everland, but also a shit ton of Samsung electronic stock. And then there's no, but it doesn't own Samsung electronic stock. It owns a lot of Samsung Bursan stock, Samsung C&T stock. Samsung C&T owns a shit ton of Samsung electronic stock. EJ owns stock in 제일모직. Does not own stock in Samsung C&T, which is the de facto holding company. So what he tried to do is he tried to merge the two companies using a ratio that's super favorable to him. And the directors all agreed. So they actually went to courts over this. He actually was found guilty. He actually did serve time in jail for this.
For that.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't serve time in jail for the merger, but he served time in jail for trying to bribe the National Pension Service through the president, and he was found guilty of that. Then he got a presidential pardon. But TLDR, that's just one instance. There's also an instance with Hanwha that's happening, and it also happens to be like a lot of quote unquote allegations of stock manipulation tends to happen when the owning family has inheritance issues, where they want to purposefully tank the stock price,
Wow.
so that they could give it for cheap, pay minimal inheritance tax, pump the stock price back up, so they only have to sell, let's say, a tenth of it to fund the inheritance tax, right? And Samsung's also being accused of this.
Wow.
Because Samsung C&T, who's known for their Raymian brand of apartments, hasn't actually done a project for like 2-3 years, during which Lee Jae-yong was inherited the stock from his father.
Because the law stipulates that the inheritance tax should be calculated based on the past and forward multiples of the stock price. Yeah.
So when you're getting your stocks, you purposely deflate the stock prices so you can get a lot without paying.
Yeah, so
Plus minus 12 months.
Yeah. So specifically during that window where they're actually like monitoring the price to see what your average price is going to be.
But how does that serve the company? That also fucks the company too, doesn't it?
No. So the stand-in for the company is the owning family.
So only way the company gets fucked by the tanking stock price is if they have a loan off of the stock's value. But they don't, so technically they're not fucked.
Okay. So they're not doing anything for the company, they're just fucking the shareholders.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
And it's not against
That's
the
not
law.
okay, I see. For the company itself it's like whatever. But for the shareholder it sucks.
The argument is that the having one owning family provides stability for the company. Ergo, that's why the directors are acting in the best interest of the founding family because it provides stability for the company to exist over centuries.
And CNT is also a public company?
Yeah.
But my question is, why would any rational investor invest in that company then?
I don't think the investors would have invested upon hearing that news of mergers, but then most of the investors would have backed it way in the past.
They bought in the past. But going forward though, doesn't that
No, which is why there's this phenomenon called the Korea discount.
Right.
Where Korean stocks underperform despite they have lower multiples.
Right.
Than their American counterparts. Heck, even their Japanese counterparts and Chinese counterparts. Because investors are factoring in the discount for that sort of governance issues.
Because investors are aware that owners are not in their interest of driving the stock price up for the inheritance purpose.
So Lee Jae-myung is saying that he will fix that?
So, funnily enough, 민주당 has said it, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think will be likely?
Yeah.
To actually happen?
So, what I've realized about this is the new dynamic between conservatives and progressives across
Korea?
No, across the entire world. Usually, when you say conservatives, you think of deregulation and more small business friendly, etc., etc. That used to be the conservatives of the past. Now what we're seeing is that the conservative power base has actually was it amalgamated around a few billionaires in every single country.
Conservatives?
Yeah. If you take a look at the Republican power base, it's a bunch of billionaire donors.
Yeah.
If you take a look at the Korean conservatives, it's also the type of
oligarchy.
owners. Yeah. It's turning more and more into that sort of power dynamic where they're getting a lot of their funding and messaging from the top 0.1%, and then they're also promising a bunch of these things for rural, poor populations within their nations, and then the middle class and the people who actually want social mobility. These people are voting for progressive agendas to essentially provide a social mobility ladder, or so the thinking goes. I'm not saying it's entirely that direct. There are certain policies from the conservative angle where it makes sense. Like, for example, Donald Trump's stating that we need to bring down the cost of medicine in America. Yeah. I agree with it, despite what the underlying what he really wants to accomplish. Now, that being said, once you have this dynamic, especially for small business and whatnot, what you start realizing is that when conservative governments are in power, they don't deregulate, they actually increase regulation to increase the barrier to entry. That's sort of the pattern, but unfortunately, when the progressives are in power, they don't do anything to deregulate either. So it's a complex issue.
Basically, the politics are founded upon protecting their own circles. So I get their point. Yeah.
But my question was, how likely do you think it is for this legislation to pass?
Oh, right.
Because there's going to be so much money backing the other side. Right.
But thankfully in Korea...
Oh, you're right. Korea is different.
Yeah,
Korea
political donations have a hard cap, and it's actually largely funded.
Lobbying isn't
funded by the government.
Right.
So in Korea, it has a high likelihood of passing, specifically because now there are 14 million individuals who are invested in the stock market. 14 million. The voter base is 14 million. So that's a good... Jesus Christ, I'm terrible at math, but 35% of the voter base is invested in the stock market, and these people want to see this passed.
Yeah, but not all the 35% will be very engaged in.
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe 0.1%.
But more recently,
but yeah, I see your point. More people are interested in this.
Yeah, more recently, these people have become super politically motivated, and I see increased chatter online in the Korean ecosystem where people are saying we have to go vote for this single issue.
But you know what my worry is now that I'm talking
Yeah.
about this, first time I'm hearing about this?
Yeah.
Maybe that could pass. And like, I don't know anything about this, but it could pass. But there's no way that the chaebol would just sit still.
Oh yeah.
And like, maybe they'll let this pass, but like, they're going to come up with other ways to pay less inheritance tax.
Yeah.
Or to make things favorable for themselves. Or at the very least, or at the very most, maybe like move to another country.
Oh yeah. These are very real risks. Like capital flight is a real risk. There are other loopholes that they have already used in the past that have been closed. And let me just make this straight. There will always be loopholes, and it's always going to be a whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
But like getting this foundational identity in so here's the thing: if you don't hold a fiduciary duty to your shareholders, I don't think capitalism works.
Yeah, I think that's a fucked up system that
Yeah.
we're currently in. But
Yeah.
I wonder if there's. I wonder if there's like a more comprehensive way to, I guess, fundamentally lessen the wealth income disparity, because this is what this is about, right? Like the chaebol is like getting away, doing whatever they want, and fucking the capital system up. But okay, just fixing that thing seems like a good start. But I wish there was like a broader discussion of how we can like fix this.
So I want to separate the two issues and actually get into that, because I feel like fixing governance and fixing wealth income disparity are two separate issues.
Interesting.
Because
even in Korea?
Yeah, even in Korea. Because fixing governance issues is trying to normalize the performance of the stock market and people's incentive towards it.
Okay.
Right? So it's actively trying to incentivize people to invest into productive capital assets, as opposed to non-productive capital assets such as potentially real estate or like art pieces somewhere where they could just like park their money and see it appreciate. Having it flow into the stock market is actually more productive than having it flow into those sorts of assets.
Okay.
So I think it's an incentive structure that they're trying to fix. It doesn't fundamentally fix wealth income disparity at all. It's a separate issue. But
I do think it's related, right?
It could be tangentially related.
Right.
Nothing is ever.
I do see your point.
Nothing is ever Mises in the world.
But it's not like one to one.
Trying to fix wealth income disparity has been tried. Hey, come to Canada.
So my question is,
yeah.
if that is fixing the governance issue, what's the discussion around wealth income disparity in this election cycle?
So,
or is that being discussed at all? Because like again, Jason and I have been out of the loop. So
here, if you take a look at it, nobody's talking about increasing taxes. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's trying to fix the wealth income disparity right now.
So that's not the big topic.
Because if you actually take a look at the statistics, the Gini coefficient for wealth and income, in Korea, it's not as severe as America.
Yeah.
It's not as severe as China.
I think people forget that.
Yeah. And I think people who are saying fixing wealth income disparity is a top issue in this election cycle are a bit delusional. Because I don't think it's a top issue. I think fixing other issues so that we increase the potential output, the potential growth rate of this country is so much more fundamentally important in this election cycle.
Yeah. I mean, I get it because the price to income ratio isn't as significant as is in the States. So people always complain about like, oh, how like kimbaps are so expensive and the real estate is expensive. But then if you take the amount of rent and divide it by the value of the real estate, it is still significantly lower than that of the States, which means the rents aren't as expensive as compared to the price of the real estate.
In the States?
Yeah. In the States.
I agree.
So rent can you say that again? Rent
So here's the formula. Rent plus maintenance fees and everything, less the tax and every cost associated with becoming a landlord. So you take the net income and then divide it by the value of the real estate that you have, and you get a percentage, right? That's called the cap rate.
It's like an ROI, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that ROI in Korea stands around 2 to 3% for the most Gangnam area, while in the States it spikes up to 4 to 5. Which means
for the same price of the house, landlords in the States are collecting more income.
Right.
And conversely, renters are paying less.
Exactly. Yeah.
For the same quality of a house. Well, my gut instinct though is, do you have the gut instinct as someone who's looking to rent is that in the States, my salary is probably a lot higher compared to my rent.
I actually agree with Jason because
But this is a different ratio though.
no, it is. It's rent to income ratio.
Rent
right?
to income ratio.
So
What is that?
In Korea, it's actually below 25%. Whereas in America, it's above 30% in most markets, and it's hitting above 50% in key markets.
So I'm paying more rent for my salary, right?
Yeah. And if you think about the
It's
life in
lower in Korea?
Yeah, it's lower.
Yeah, it's lower in Korea. Like if you see people.
What about Seoul? But what about Seoul?
Seoul is still below 30%.
Yeah.
Are you that's not just Korea? That's only looking at Seoul?
Yeah.
So
because my gut instinct is that that's baking into like jjibang and stuff like that, and you're saying
your
that's
gut instinct is telling you this because
Mm-hmm.
in Korea they have this thing called the jeonse,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then you're trying to pay jeonse in cash. That's why you're thinking this. But if you take a loan on that, it's a really low subsidized loan.
So what about the jeonse? What about my ability to pay jeonse as a percentage of my salary versus like a security deposit? Oh. Is there something apples to apples?
No.
So how? But it feels.
But if
tougher.
you think about it this way, jeonse is to pay your jeonse. A lot of people just take out a bulk loan from the bank, which is actually subsidized by the government. It's backed by the government, right? So the banks know this, and they offer you a lower rate than prime. So technically,
it's like interest.
In terms of interest, you're paying like 2%,
very low interest,
and your effective rent to income ratio is below 20% in most cases.
But I guess the most comparable thing for that is how easy it is as a subprime, or maybe I'm prime.
No, you're a founder, you're subprime.
I'm probably subprime.
Yeah.
Well, if I was in banking, I'd be probably prime.
Yeah.
But anyway, my ability to take out a loan and the interest rate on that in the States versus jeonse 대출, that would be the most in Korea. That would be the most comparable thing. Then.
No, so like the issue is jeonse is a really, really weird. You probably know this better than me, but like there's no equivalent in most places across the world.
Yeah, because it's different from taking out a mortgage.
Because you get the principal back, right? You get the deposit back.
Right.
At the end of the contract.
Different.
So it is different.
So is there like a comparable like? Because I feel like rent to real estate value that only speaks to one half of the equation. Like as a landlord's perspective, like I'm not collecting enough rent as a Korean landowner. Like that's fine.
Yeah.
But I don't care. I care about as a person who's like lease like
as
renting.
a tenant.
Right. Is there a comparable metric other than like?
I think what we can take
if we
away
like
from this,
carve out the jeonse thing, then is there a comparable metric or no? How big is the jeonse market anyway compared to all renting like mechanisms?
Actually, I am curious about this.
I don't know the metrics for that.
We're gonna ask ChatGPT.
But like I will say this, the argument for jeonse is that because jeonse is so cheap, it artificially suppresses rental rates here in Korea.
Interesting. How many people? How many rent?
But like even barring that, living costs here compared to other places, it's still relatively cheaper, is what I find.
I honestly think that Korea is cheap. My whole what I'm trying to verbalize is the fact that I feel like salaries are very low in Korea. Starting salaries.
Okay, so I think that part goes into play with what you said earlier. I think it's conflating Seoul only compared to the nation averages. Because if you take a look at Seoul and the surrounding areas immediately, it's actually a lot higher than the national average.
No, really?
Yeah.
I'm going off of like examples of people close to me, but I've heard that like taking up like starting salary is like 40K, 50K.
But that
seems very low.
No, that's before incentives.
So after incentives,
Yeah.
it spikes up to like 6, 7천.
초봉?
Yeah.
Yeah, 상여금
Huh.
included.
So
Bonus.
like Korea also has a really weird, was it, salary system where you get paid 13 to 14 times, but your reported salary on your contract is for the 12 times.
So 대기업s do that a lot. SK Hynix, Samsung Electronics, they divide up your salaries 14 by 14,
Okay.
and then they like pay it within that interval, right? But then they take 1/14 of your salary and then apply a certain percentage of
okay.
it. That's what they call the like the PSI and everything, instead of related terms. And they maybe like they can pay out like 500% of it, or maybe 120% based on the.
Okay, so
company
it can go up
performance.
to
exactly
60K, 70. Okay,
yeah,
but,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I don't know. Like, I can't personally speak to this because I didn't start my career in Korea, but that's cream of the crop, right? Like, to get into Taegyup, you have to be the best and the brightest. To me, 60 to 70K max for the best and the brightest seems like a very low salary.
But then you're neglecting the cost of living.
So
No, but that's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
the cost of living is low, but I also feel like the salary is also too low, and
Right.
compared to like
So-
that comparison in the States.
So my favorite metric, economic metric, is actually GDP per capita at power purchasing parity. And in that regard, Koreans make more per capita than Canadians.
how about as in compared to US?
We're still a lot behind the US
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's
maybe
85
that's why.
grand, right? But then power purchasing parity, I think Korea's around 60K
Yeah.
and Canada's around like 58K. And it's like fucking insane because Japan's only at 45K, right? But like comparing everything to America, it also like because GDP is an accounting metric, it
Right.
neglects the fact that we have universal healthcare here.
Right.
Yeah.
It neglects the fact that we have old age pension here.
Yeah.
It neglects a lot of these social security nets. So like what we feel in actual day life,
Yeah.
I feel like Korea is super cheap, especially for that advanced economy experience, that living standard, etc., etc.
I think what you're feeling is that the amount that you get paid in Hong Kong or New York as a banker versus like what you get in Korea as a banker, it's just like the differences is huge.
Yeah. It's
so
huge.
objectively speaking,
Right.
So it just sums it up to like how much you can clear at the end of the year plus bonuses. It's just a lot different. And then so even if the rents in Korea is cheap and then the living costs are cheap, once you go into Korea, like the amount that you can save up is objectively less than what you can in the US
Right.
or HK.
Right.
That's probably what you're referring
Right.
to, right? Yeah.
So
But like
I feel like it's
think about like just building off of this. You could save, let's say, $1 million in the States. Can you retire off that?
I think that's a little too low.
Right? But in Korea, apparently the average amount of money that you need to retire here in this country is 450 million Korean won.
No, I that makes sense, but it's probably exponentially harder to get your million here.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
my point is, you don't even have to get to $1 million,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I feel like it scales with your income level. Everything scales with, depending on your location. You're obviously going to get paid a lot more in New York. You're obviously going to be able to save more in New York if you make more. But objectively speaking, that money is only going to get you so far.
Right. Things are much more expensive in New York.
So I think it scales quite evenly if you think about it, because
I agree that it scales, but I think it's still harder for like a Korean to make a good living, even despite the lower costs of living and better social security. I think it's still harder to own a house in Korea
Own a house.
Yeah,
Okay.
buy a house, own a house.
So if you take New York, for example, you don't hear a lot of people buying up homes within
York.
Manhattan.
Right.
But then they mostly buy homes around like the vicinity of the area,
Right,
greater New York,
Jersey.
Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Brooklyn. So I think it goes for the same in Seoul too.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about that perspective, surprisingly high ratio of people buy homes in Seoul within the central part of the CBD or like any.
Right.
condos.
If I wanted to, I can save up money and buy like a house in Jibang.
Yeah, it's just a matter of
And
leverage.
it is actually easy to do that.
Yeah, you
But-
could go to Bhutan, Suwon.
Yeah. If I think about it that way.
So it's a metaphor, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe things aren't as skewed.
Also, I want to raise the fact that one of my friends, new friend by the way, he also recently had a baby. His hospital bill, despite the fact that he had insurance, was 6,500.
In the States?
Yeah, just for giving birth, just for the hospital.
Wow.
Wow.
Mind you, I spent a week in the 2 weeks in the hospital, and my wife had a C-section. We paid 2,500 Canadian. So in American, that's like 1,800 bucks.
So if things aren't as skewed, and I think there is an element of truth in that, then that's why people aren't talking about raising taxes this election cycle, because everyone's kind of happy with.
If anything, we should be cutting taxes in this country.
Yeah.
Because the graduated tax scale has been calibrated at income levels in early 2000, I feel.
Yeah.
So this it doesn't take into consideration that a lot more people are making a lot more money because lifestyle inflation just happened. Like a lot of things are more expensive now, right? So I feel like we have to rectify for this.
Before we move on.
Oh yeah.
The
The
Chunse.
statistics.
So, as of 2019, approximately 42% of South Korean households rented their residencies. Among these renters, 15% were under Chunse. 20% were under monthly rent with a deposit. I think it's 반전세.
Yeah.
20%. 3% only did 월세. And 4% lived in their dwelling free of charge, which I guess they inherited or something.
Yeah.
So most people actually live in 반전세. And then it's 전세.
Wait,
I think-
반전세
Oh,
technically-
whoa, and then
Yeah.
but 월세 is 51%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but like rent with a deposit is like when you pay 10 million won for your deposit but pay 1 million won a month.
Wait. So that 42%.
What's monthly rent without a deposit versus 월세? Those are different.
Monthly rent without a deposit is usually like 단기 임대.
Yeah, 당기임대. Airbnb. Yeah.
That's why it's such a small percent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So most people, majority of people live in 월세.
Yeah.
Now you know.
Yeah. Wait, what were you gonna say?
Yeah.
I was just wondering if that 58%, the rest of the world is people owning homes or just them living on 월세.
The 51%,
Yeah,
they're
I was
living
just
on
wondering-
월세.
Oh yeah, 월세.
No.
Okay.
You know how it was 42% who were rented?
Yeah, so I was just wondering
The
about the
other
segment breakdown.
But I think I read somewhere that it's the home ownership rate in this country is approaching 60%.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that
so
must be
that
right.
must be
So-
the figure. Yeah.
42% rent,
Uh-huh.
and then half of the renters do 월세.
Yeah.
The other 58% own a house
Right.
or home.
Yeah. But then like 58% is also super in line with a lot of countries that are having housing issues. Like Canada is above 60% from what I remember. Australia's at like 65% home ownership.
Yeah.
Isn't that good?
No, it's terrible. Because the issue is it's
More than half.
Yeah. So it's a perverse incentive where if more than half of your voter base owns homes, then all your policies have to be aligned so that you defend home prices.
Pro landlord.
Yeah. So Australia actually has a really perverse incentive where you could take write-offs on top of write-offs for your home.
Mm-hmm.
So it's bad for the living standards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because you're helping the homeowners
Yeah.
as a politician,
Mm-hmm.
not the other way.
Yeah.
Well, that sucks for us.
But then that's kind of how Singapore's headed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because most people own homes, and then they're trying to help the citizens make off living with rent.
So like, this is what happened during the Bush era, by the way.
Mm.
Oh,
No, go ahead. I do want to hear this.
yeah, no. During the Bush era, one of the policies that this is what actually led up to the subprime mortgage crisis. They actually wanted to push up home ownership rates from like around 55% to above 60%. So they relaxed a lot of the rules and regulations around who can take out mortgages, which led to a lot of subprime lending. Because apparently during that time, Republican strategists realized that homeowners have an overwhelming tendency to vote Republican.
They want more homeowners.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's like a smart way to target policies like by geography. Like, let's say this is like a 60% home ownership nationwide. Like, why don't we make it easier for like people to own homes like outside of Seoul or something like that? I'm sure people are thinking about
Don't they already do this?
They already do for investing purposes, but then it's mostly revolved around, like, let's say the infamous GTX line that goes across from Paju to like down to like Dongtan. They're buying off homes or lands within that section, but then I don't see much demand springing up in like Yeosu or like Jeonnam-do, for example. In that regards.
Why is it not picking up?
Because there may be some government institutions moving into that vicinity, but then it's only 공무원. Like, who else comes in there? It's only 공무원 and their respective families. And some even do 주말부부, so it doesn't really help.
Would you guys move into somewhere like that if they gave you like a ridiculous incentive?
So, two ways. If I'm not interested in making off a living as a real estate investor and is more involved with the stocks or any of the other capital goods, then I would enjoy the cheap rent. But then if I'm more pro like real estate, then I'll be living in Seoul. And also the kids' education too, right? Like, you get all the goodies in Seoul, and why would you want to exclude yourself out of that circle?
But that's also an assumption.
Exactly.
No,
like there could be good schools outside.
But not only that, but what am I gonna be doing? What's my job?
In Jeonnam-do, for example. I'm just saying Jeonnam-do because I'm from Busan, but you know.
I mean, I was born in Iksan, so like I know I go down to Iksan a shit ton. I love my grandparents. I love all my relatives. But Jesus fucking Christ, what am I gonna do here?
So that's the trade-off, right? Like, let's say the government gives you a ridiculous incentive. Would you take that incentive?
No, I need a job.
Well, like, would you be incentivized to find a job there and like?
But here's the thing: there are no jobs.
So unless the government guarantees the pay
job
and the standard of living, as in the income perspective, then.
So I've repeated this talking point over and over again, but obviously Koreans don't listen to a foreigner like me. I said remote work is going to save this country.
Yeah. So back to our discussion, I think we need a phase where we need to get the governance straight for the capital markets, and then move on to the asset valuation on the next second phase. But for now, I think it's right to have the government fix the governments within the interests of shareholders first, so that people can move their assets from real estate to capital markets and stocks or bonds, for example.
Yeah, and once that happens,
companies get the funds they need, and it's better for the economic production.
Are you more productive working remotely?
So funny thing, I actually am technically working remote to helping out a friend. Not helping out a friend, I'm actually going to join full-time hopefully when we fundraise. But
Yeah.
you know what? Funnily enough, I don't think there's a difference. I'm neither more productive nor less productive, but it's because I feel like the only thing that the thing is I'm equally as motivated to work.
Because you're making your own projects.
Yeah.
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 It's a working culture.
Yeah,
right?
it's a working culture.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I have said this to my friend. I said, because we did have to deal with a low performer just this past week, and what we realized is that some people just have to be forced to do things, while other people just motivate themselves. A remote only culture only works for a team where everyone is self-motivated.
What do you think?
I think, I mean, to add on to this, I agree, but it's very tied to the incentives. So if you have an employee on remote work with a high base salary and less incentives, then that person's gonna slack off. Very high likely.
I agree.
But with low base and high incentives, then he's probably gonna do his shit right. That's my theory. Yeah.
I mean, Charlie Munger did say, "Show me the incentives, and I'll show you the outcome."
Exactly.
I've been saying that a lot recently. It's kind of crazy. Why? What do you think? Are you contemplating an all remote team?
No, definitely not. So we work in the office 5 days a week, and on Sundays we all work remotely.
Oh my God, you guys have a JoJo Leo culture.
We do have a JoJo Leo culture. But I think some people are self-motivated, and it does help cut down on commuting times if you work remotely. But I do think there is a trade-off in that communication becomes less easy if everyone's working remotely. Because like when everyone's in the office, you'd be like, hey, like, can you take a look at this? And like, you can't do that when you're working remotely. So
you know what's funny? Yes, you can.
I think it's the matter of like the difference between CPU and GPU. So with CPUs, you can only tackle one task at a time. I think that's great with the remote work.
Yeah.
But then with GPUs, you have to handle multiple projects.
That's a great
at
analogy,
once.
yeah.
But then with that, communication becomes very like holistic.
Right.
And you can't do that in chats. Where everything's just a
you know
series.
what? You know what it is? It's because so like you know how in software architecture you have monoliths and microservices. If you have a monolith, communication becomes super important because everything is tied to everything else. But if you have microservices, you could silo it away. And everyone is in charge of something, so that accountability is on the counterparty. Once that happens, I feel like you're right. Then it's like a CPU just running its own thing. Everyone's their own GPU core. And then I think remote work works.
So allocation.
I think that works in some companies, but I rarely think that works at like a very early stage startup. But
it's working for us.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, it's working great for us right now. Obviously, but I do hope eventually for this company, we fundraise and we settle in. I told my friends, like, dude, come settle in Toronto because the Canadian dollar is shit. Our dollars will go a lot longer, and we could all afford to live there. But like, we get to choose our own city, right? But if we do not have the option to work in a non-major economic center, I feel like we're gonna continue to do remote first. Because otherwise, the benefits packages, the actual pay, like the dollar just doesn't reach that far.
Right.
So, which geographic segment of the customers do you serve?
Right. So the company is right now looking to serve influencers and creators.
Right.
right? So
We're
thankfully,
all remote.
yeah, they're all online first, thankfully. So because our customers are online first, we're able to make this decision. But you're right. You know what? This actually is another great point.
Yeah.
Where are your customers based?
Mine are currently in Korea, but we're thinking about going to the States.
Right, but even in the States, like depending on your initial target, initial customer profile, you decide on different geographies, right?
You should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for example, Facebook was based out of Harvard, and it went after college kids first, specifically in Ivy League schools,
Right.
which was a great fit.
Right.
But then they started targeting specifically Western schools like Stanford and Berkeley because that's where all the VCs were.
Right.
So that sort of deal. But yeah, no, I think you have to be where your customers are.
Right. But back to politics.
Oh yeah. By all means.
What else are people discussing in terms of policies other than the 상법 개정 for this election cycle?
Oh, AI.
Also, even before that, is there any chance that any other candidate other than Lee Jae-myung will win or no?
So Polymarket
Okay.
has Lee Jae-myung winning at 90%.
Okay. That's game over.
It has Kim Moon-soo winning at 7% and Lee Jun-suk winning at 3%.
Wow.
So, yeah. Personally, Polymarket does get some things wrong. For the Canadian election, they forecasted a liberal majority. What ended up happening was a liberal minority. Pedantic differences for you guys, major differences for us, etc. But they get certain things wrong, but the direction is correct. Yeah. So, going back, everyone's saying AI, and one of the craziest policies from Kim Moon-soo is he said, we're gonna mint out AI unicorns by spending $100 billion.
Oh my god.
Kim Moon-soo said that? Print out AI unicorns?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And then everyone's saying, dude, you could just make 100 unicorns with $100 billion.
Yeah, exactly. You just pump capital.
That's hilarious.
Billion each.
That is actually hilarious.
Oh my
So
God.
like this guy obviously doesn't understand basic economics
Right.
or financial instruments.
That's hilarious.
But then Lee Jae-myung's saying, like, along the same lines, he's saying, yeah, well, the government is just going to hoover up NVIDIA GPUs. We're going to use our coffers to buy GPUs for all of you. Here's the thing. I've recently been talking with got friendly with somebody from NHN who has a cloud server business, and they actually operate a lot of these GPU clusters that the government set up. The government actually runs a lot of R&D projects that they outsource to companies on these GPU farms. And the only time they could actually make a sale is when the government's not using this. What does that mean? If the government buys GPUs, nobody's going to be able to use it.
Yeah.
They're just going to run bullshit test after bullshit test.
I can see that.
Non-productive things.
Yeah.
Classic.
So like, I don't know who's. I feel like all of these guys should just like lay off the AI and just give tax incentives.
If the government buys GPUs, Naver and Kakao are going to do everything to get their hands on it.
Yeah.
So it's going to be WeWork, essentially, of a GPU form.
It's like, so the government spends money to buy GPUs, and the government spends money to essentially use these GPUs. The entire economy is just run by government funding.
And at that point, Korea's going to do better with the data center operations.
Right, but then at the same time, if your entire economy is dependent on the government, then you're a communist nation.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah.
You guys are a democracy on paper.
But it's a great way to incentivize the countrysides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's communism! Guys! Kim Moon-soo speaking communism, Lee Jae-myung speaking communism. Which one of you is non-communist?
Lee Jun-suk?
Unfortunately, yes.
Interesting.
I think it's because he has a Harvard education, so he understands American capitalism.
Yeah.
But Jesus Christ, like the economic structure for this. I think it's because Korea's tried to leapfrog too many things, so it doesn't have the context for capitalism. So they just have things because it looks pretty.
And like foreign direct investment has been the core KPI for a lot of the APAC countries, except Korea.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
Why is that?
like take Malaysia for example, with the whole scandal of
IMDb.
1MDB.
1MDB. It was so focused on FDI that it created the whole vehicle and the whole scam out of it to just tie in with the political party agendas. But then with Korea, I think we do have this very vague notion that we will do fine on our own. As long as other foreign countries buy our goods and services, we're good on our own, basically. So manufacturing, done by Koreans. Work, like white collar jobs, done by Koreans. Done. So I think once we realize the importance of foreign direct investments by taking a look at countries like Singapore, for example, we think that the pro-landlord policy is bad, but then if we see the Singaporeans making off living as landlords, I think it's a good deal, to be honest. But then we need to break it down by phase, where we need to work on our governments so that we would be able to attract, like to citizens too. Just make stocks and bonds more attractive, and get that capital allocation from real estate to the other capital markets, and then maybe launch into pro-landlord policies while you see more landlords, like you see more Korean citizens becoming landlords.
How well performing of an asset class was real estate in Korea historically? Because I know, well, I haven't looked into the data myself, but I was listening to a podcast.
Yeah.
And have you guys heard of this book called Psychology of Money?
No.
I've heard of it.
It's a very famous book. I haven't read it yet, but anyway, the author of that book came on and he was talking about how real estate as an asset class was not like a super well-performing investment historically. You should invest in index funds and like the broader stock market. But why are Koreans so obsessed with investing in real estate?
So that has to do with the capital gains you can make off of the real estate.
Okay.
And what I mean by capital gains is not rent.
Okay.
Like take it, if we look at it from a financial perspective, rent is something equivalent to dividends. Right? And then the capital gains, that majority of the capital gains we're speaking of is once we sell the product.
Right.
So that price appreciation is what Koreans have been targeting mostly. Because of what I said before, like it only stands at 3%. Like what capital product is attractive with the 3% dividends?
I also want to
it's a pretty low dividend rate.
Exactly.
But you're saying that capital gains has been pretty high historically?
Yeah, it's been productive.
I actually want to build off of this. It's been productive compared to Korean stocks.
Relatively.
Everything's relative.
Yeah, relatively.
Because Korean stocks have been stagnant.
Yeah.
Compared to that, then
Yeah. And because foreign capital controls are so stringent in this country, it's been historically very difficult for Korean investors to access American markets.
So it is very interesting how in the States you just buy index funds and then call it a day. But you can't do that in Korea.
Yeah, but it's like the same in Canada. Where
is it? Okay.
Canadian, because every investor has home market bias. You want to invest locally because you know these companies better. Canadians also have a lot of home market bias, but the stock market, the TSX, has been underperforming American stock markets. So a lot of Canadians then started investing into real estate. But that plus the influx of Chinese capital and foreign capital inflated real estate where it's actually outperforming stock markets.
Has the stock market also been stagnant?
No, ours has been actually growing, but at a slower rate.
Got it.
Yeah. Also, I do want to say, Jason Yoon for president, the second Yoon presidency will be better than the first.
You have my vote, Jason.
Oh man. Thanks, guys.
I will become a Korean citizen just to vote for you.
Fix our real estate market, please.
But what I said about real estate, so that capital gains has kept the rent low so far. But then once the rents go up high, then that essentially implies that the capital gains will be less once you sell the property. The gains you can make off is marginally less than what has been. So I think that's when the real estate can be seen as an attractive product in the stock market as well, in terms of REITs, the public stocks. In Japan, for example, you can get like 6% off of the REITs products. But then if you see the office buildings in markets in Japan, you make close to zero capital gains by selling the office buildings. You make everything by rent.
You don't have capital gains in Japan?
Rarely.
So in Japan, it's super fun. Residential real estate depreciates. Commercial real estate doesn't depreciate.
Wow.
But the rents go high.
Yeah.
Huh, that's so interesting. Why is that?
I think it's because
There's no demand?
the market still thinks that the properties are too expensive.
Oh, wow. So it just doesn't go up anymore.
Yeah, so the price tag has
No one's
reached a
buying.
point where demand depreciates.
Oh, and so as a landlord, you want to get your rent then?
Yeah.
Because that's like the only source of income. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
But like even in America, you take a look at a lot of these REITs products. They have dividend payouts of like 5%.
Is that just in Tokyo though? Or is that like nationwide?
What do you mean?
The real estate price is not appreciating in Japan. Is that just Tokyo?
It's primarily focused in Tokyo. Osaka and other Western cities are trying to attract foreign capital. So the cap rate is still low at like 3% to 4%.
So they do want capital, they want to jack up the capital gains so that rent stays low
So that's
to incentivize
exactly.
landlords.
So that's
right?
the maturity of the real estate. The first
That's
phase,
so interesting.
low cap rate, low rent, but high capital gains. And then less capital gains, high rent.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Is there any other country that's like Japan? Where the capital gains is like non-existent and landlords are jacking up rent? Are there any countries like that?
Not that I know of.
Yeah, not that I know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
It's primarily because the Japanese had such a massive asset bubble.
Yeah, that too I heard.
And they already reached their peak a long time ago. So.
Wow.
And they have less foreign direct investments.
But they do have a much bigger economy than Korea currently, right?
Yeah.
But that's because they have so many people. So per GDP per capita is actually
Korea is actually higher,
here.
yeah.
Yeah. But then they just have 120 million people.
And they own a lot of assets in the US and China. So that's why they got the grip.
Huh.
You know what's funny? Japan's economy is still bigger than India's.
I can believe that. Yeah.
But India has
A lot
1.4
more
billion people.
Right.
It like blows my goddamn mind.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. So that revenue per employee perspective, it's just terrible.
Yeah. No, so like I have a lot of friends who are doing startups here in Korea. And they tell me, yeah, no, we're going to go to Vietnam next year. Oh, we're going to go to India next year. I tell them, shut the fuck up. You're not going to be able to cover your server costs. Yeah. Because these people have like $300 a month to spend. What makes you think they're going to spend an entire day's worth of budget just for your software product?
Yeah. That's what I realized in when I was doing the K Beauty thing.
Yeah.
Did I tell you guys?
Yeah.
Eye-opening experience.
Right.
Kind of feeling that right now with my product right now. But
yeah, because in Korea, even though we're making $36,000 a year in GDP per capita, paying for mental health on a monthly basis,
it's
feels
also
like a premium.
college students.
They're also dirt poor.
Yep.
It's crazy. Did you know? But like the minimum wage here, it's like 10,000 won
per hour.
Yeah. That's higher than Japan.
How much is Japan?
Apparently, Japan is like 9,800 won.
Oh wow.
Or something, and it also varies by region.
But the rents are higher in Japan. So
Yeah.
The rent is higher in Japan?
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
So that's what I call.
Because the capital. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So it actually would be worse to live in Japan if
Yeah.
you were not well off
As an average.
as an
salary.
average
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because rent is high, minimum wage is low.
Mm.
Interesting.
Even if you were making power purchase parity wages in cities like Toronto, Vancouver, New York, chances are you probably spend above 30% of your income on rent. Whereas in Korea, it stays well below 30%.
I was thinking about this, but can someone explain to me why Lee like I know this, but why is Lee Jae-myung so likely to win? Like the math isn't really mathing because I understand that the other guy Yoon did martial law, right? But because he did that, Lee Jae-myung is so likely to win. Like, how does that work? Like, what is the causal relationship here? Does that mean like we had a huge moderate voting base that swung to the Democratic Party because they hate the conservatives, or is there something else? Because that's the only way the math would work, right?
Right.
There was like
So,
a big.
The only numbers
swing
that I
state.
actually remember are from the U.S. election.
Okay.
But if you take a look at the U.S. election, Donald Trump won 33% of the vote. Kamala Harris won 31% of the vote. And the rest of the people, essentially like 35, 36% of the vote, did not vote.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So you have to take into consideration every economy, every country in the world, most of the population are in the middle. And they're always swinging back and forth depending on their personal interests.
I see. Okay.
That being said, so in terms of the economy, under the former President Yoon's presidency, the economy was not doing well. That being said, is it all his fault? I would say it's actually it's actually on the, it's a long hangover that we had after the COVID stimulus, is what I feel. So it's not entirely his fault. But the thing that did make everybody think that it is his fault was the martial law.
Right.
And then the martial law actually deepened the recession. Once that happened, these guys cannot have keys to the economy.
Right. So the assumption is that the majority of the voting base is moderate.
Yeah.
And
then
they do get swung.
we have polls to justify it. In most presidential election cycles and in most presidential election polling, in any country that you see, most of the people are always on the fence until the day of.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think the reason why people vote for Minjudan at this stage is because they also do realize that Minjudan has the ball in the court for the past couple months or year.
Okay.
Right? So they know that Minjudan already has a power.
Okay.
To sway any of the lawmaking decisions and processes. So they might as well hand the ball to the Lee Jae-myung for him to spearhead the whole thing.
Right.
It's been working. And I think that most people
that's an interesting logic, but I understand.
But so after he keep his promises, then it's up to him again to fix the ongoing problems or any of the problems that has incurred from his policies or past policies, right? So that's also his responsibility. And if we want to make him his or Minjudan's responsibility, then we might as well keep him in presidents for the time being.
Because the Minjudan already has legislative power, just also give them the executive power too, right?
So I think there's going to be people who want to vote for Lee Jae-myung to just either just fix the problems that are ongoing in this country as a whole for the greater good, or just to fuck him up.
To make sure that
he's held accountable for the
that he cannot blame another motherfucker on the face of the planet.
Exactly. Because that has been the Korean politics for the past decade or so. Always handing the ball to each other, as if there's a pact made between the two parties of like, oh yeah, we'll take the shit this turn, but next time you guys should be taking the shit. But I think that power balance has been broken because of the
Martial
the
law.
whole martial law thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the martial law thing. It's a bit of a canon event for this country.
Mm.
Mm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Let's say your wife,
Mm.
family,
Mm.
or friends
Yeah.
are voting a certain way.
Mm.
Would that influence your vote?
No.
I wouldn't take it that far to persuade the others,
Mm-hmm.
but I would stand my ground.
Ground.
Yeah.
You'd vote the other way if necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wait. Why? What's going on in your mind?
My parents
Mm.
have a specific candidate
Mm.
that they're telling me to vote for.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
But I don't know if that's someone that I would really vote for.
I can already tell.
But my parents are of a certain age group,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? And I'm like not someone who gives a fuck about that age group.
No, but like, okay, so back in the old days,
Yeah.
in colonial America, you used to have to stand up on stage and proclaim your vote.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You learned this in AP history, but today it's all secret ballots.
Mm-hmm.
There's no fucking way that they know how you voted.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no point. Like, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You can always package it otherwise.
Yeah.
So.
Because the same thing happens to my wife every election cycle, and she just like ignores them.
Mm. Mm. At the dinner table, I would say, I'd vote whoever that my parents wanted.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
secretly just.
Exactly.
I think I will try to convince. I think that's not my style. I would be like, I'm gonna vote for X, and this is why.
Mm.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but you're asking for a fight at the dinner table. Why would you do that?
Or I'll just, I don't know.
Like, there's a reason.
I haven't decided yet.
There's a reason why even Americans avoid politics at Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
right? Like, dude, we're all cordial as long as we keep the politics out of it.
Right.
Wait, so in your situation, is there a point in proving your point at the dinner table?
So actually, no.
Okay.
And actually, I'm actually on the fence
Okay.
about who to
Oh,
vote
so you're
for.
still undecided.
Okay.
I'm undecided, so
Yeah.
I don't know. And I don't give a fuck, honestly, at this point. I don't want to do my research. Like,
But
I'm
you
busy
have
enough.
ChatGPT to do your
Right.
research.
like, but I'm also like, this isn't like my number one priority, to be honest.
Mm.
So I'm on the fence,
Mm.
and I don't know if I should just listen to my parents
Mm-hmm.
and not do any research, because that's like a cop out. It's easy for me, or if I should do my research and vote some other way and convince my family to vote a certain way.
Okay, so
I don't know.
in Australia, everyone is obligated to vote. If you do not vote with
Yeah.
a good reason, good cause, you pay a fine. Right? But what ends up happening is a lot of Australians write in just basic nonsense in their ballots as a protest vote because they don't want to have to vote. I understand that sentiment.
Yeah.
But if you did not vote in the election and something happens in terms of policy changes that actively harms you, then it's
You have
all
no one
on
to
you.
blame. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you doing research for like who to vote for and stuff, or are you like keeping up
I'm
with?
still internally debating.
Because it's like next week, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next week, early polling, and then the week after. Yeah.
So back to the notion that I introduced to you guys, whether to hand the ball to the 민주당 or just vote based on whatever I think is right. Still debating.
Oh, you're still on the fence.
Yeah, still internally debating, but I don't bother on persuading my parents or other.
What about your wife?
We don't talk politics.
Really?
Yeah, we don't talk politics. We only talk about the.
We
what's
vote
good
in
for-
different countries.
But do you talk about it?
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
And I say, dude, they're all fucking idiots.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I say too.
Yeah, same.
Uh,
Yeah, we always shit about people, but we don't
like,
back someone up.
oh, you're not gonna say are you gonna tell her who you voted for or no?
Probably not.
Oh, actually, I'm super transparent about this,
Yeah.
and I tell her my
So
motivation.
interesting.
But I say, this is my decision. You're open to make up your own mind. Yeah.
You wouldn't disclose who you voted for.
But I would kind of imply it to my wife by saying what's good for the real estate.
Do you think your wife is like in the same political leaning as you, or different?
I'm assuming she is, but at this point, I don't know. Because she's been having
interesting.
second thoughts about.
Dude, I feel like this is a 60-second interview or something. What the hell?
Why?
Some CBS reporter trying to interrogate this shit.
I'm just curious if like people have different political leanings in marriages.
I will say this, especially coming from Canada where we have a parliamentary system. Majority governments fuck up everything.
Fair enough.
Best case scenario, I think Yoon Suk-yeol actually did limited damage because he didn't have
The
Congress.
full 5 years.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't have Congress under his power. But once
And he
you
also
uni-
didn't have 5
yeah.
years to fuck up.
Yeah. But then once you align it, just like what Donald Trump has right now, a lot of things just go straight in one direction. Where the world is actually more like a zigzag pattern. And you can only get zigzag patterns where when you have people debating at equal footing. So personally speaking, in terms of like just base purely political game theory, I don't think Lee Jae-myung should win. But everything in terms of opinion polling is telling Lee Jae-myung is gonna win. And honestly, in terms of candidates and policies, unfortunately for me, everything that I see from as a foreigner's perspective, he's given me a clearer blueprint for success.
Yeah.
But that being said, it's not a blueprint for everyone's success.
I would have to say that he's probably the best marketer out of all of them.
Oh, he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has that gut,
Yeah.
like instinct on how to be a good marketer.
And Kim Won-soo just does not know how to compose himself.
He's like a dinosaur. He's so old.
Yeah. Also, did you know he used to be a radical communist?
I did know that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the craziest part. But anywho, we're already at the 1 hour mark. Is there anything you want to address any further?
I'm good.
You're good?
Yeah.
You're good? All right, cool. Let's wrap it up.